they're going for the three-peat of felonies with some of their players, and they're having trouble right now. And
yeah, that's fair. That's not the three-peat the Chiefs want to be talking about, right? Like, all right, y'all. Well, welcome back to Live Good Dynasty. My name is Nate Tapales, one of your hosts for this thing, and we're super stoked to jump into our topics for today. But I've got my co-host Arlen Love. How's it going, man?
I'm doing great, man. It's good to sit down and talk with you again and talk some fantasy football. It's man, it can be healing. It can be a lot of fun, and this off season is quickly becoming not an off season. It's approaching.
Yeah, I can't believe we're actually almost here. It's like end of June. We've got a little bit of a break. We're in that little bit of a lull time, but going into the time where we get to just talk about fun stuff, right? So I think this is the time we're going to get a little bit slower with the football news and jump into rankings a little bit today. We're going to jump into our running back rankings, have some discussions around something I think is super important to what we do, and just focusing in on who our guys are, and really dig into who we're going to be targeting as we get into redraft season, as we get into I don't know how many leagues you're actually in, but I think I'm up to 7 leagues this year. So we're going to be doing some drafting, doing some other fun things. Yeah. So we'll be talking about our guys. But we're going to jump into today. We're just going to get into our guys and jump into I think level 6 through 10 and who our running backs are. And we're excited to do so. So why don't we just jump into this thing? And I'll throw it over to you.
Sounds good, man. Yeah. Well, we can kick it off with just kind of naming our vet guys that we're going to kind of put our name on. This is an unofficial name. We have full rights to adjust as the off season goes on. But I think before we start, we should definitely declare so that we can laugh at each other or praise each other throughout the season, depending on how our people do. But for our vet, the person I chose, and we talk a lot about wide receiver because you and I both value wide receivers a lot within Dynasty fantasy football. So I'm actually excited about that second half of the show, kind of looking into the running backs themselves. So I'm kind of forgiving myself by telling people that we will talk about running backs. I promise. Nico Collins, though, that's my guy. I've really liked him over last year. He stood out and he started showcasing his route running abilities. I like from reception perception, giving them a shout out. His yards after the catch is really strong, but his route running 91% versus man and over 80% versus press is, even when we don't have Diggs there, right? We have just a rookie in Tank Dell and him that they had to focus on, and they had a hard time even with press trying to shut him down, even when they're all over him, and that he saw a decent amount of double coverage throughout last year, but he was successful through that with a rookie quarterback. Even though Stroud is a baller, it's still really telling when you have that young wide receiver that is able to connect really early on that quarterback. And I think the only question earlier in the offseason was you got Diggs, you got Tank, you got him, and only Tank is in contract really after this year. And then they locked him up and they paid him to showcase and say and declare that he's our guy. So I think that the team's actions also verify that he's their guy. He's I think that where I see him in the next couple of years is approaching, especially after, I think Diggs will probably be out after this year. Nico will be the guy. And I think that he's going to be that AJ Brown level when people are going to considering him teetering on that tier 1, but probably right in tier 2. And for that, I think, especially with everything going on there, it's depending on the owner in your league, they might also be willing to part, and it might feel like you're overpaying, and you might be able to actually acquire him before he becomes a Chase or a Jefferson or AJ Brown level.
Yeah. I think that's a good call, right? People might be scared with how many pass catchers there are right now in the moment, and if they're not thinking about that long term, I think that's a good call out. As someone that you're able to watch right now that could may not pay out this year with how many pass catchers they have, but maybe he will, because like you said, they've already invested in him. So it's going to go there. For me, for my vet, I had to think long and hard. I knew we've talked about wide receivers up and down, left and right for the last few weeks or last few times we've met. And one position I keep trying, and I'm almost forcing myself to talk about tight ends right now. And So just because they're often the forgotten position, and especially if your league isn't tight end premium, there's only one spot required for them in most leagues that are out there. So not super important, but I think we talked about this a few episodes ago where, because the playing field's leveling out a lot more with tight ends, and it's not like either punt it or go with it. You have to really think about that position because people are getting consistent points there now. It's not just like, hey, most teams are going to be okay with getting 2 or 3 points a week from that spot, because there's so many options now. And so one person I think about that might be under the radar, I think census rankings has him out of the top 12 currently in a lot of places I'm looking at for redraft purposes, at least. Maybe within top 10, depending on the league that you're looking at. But Pat Freiermuth, he is in an interesting situation, right? There's not a ton of places, and I got some of this info from CBS Sports. Shout out over there. But there isn't a ton of places where you thought, man, Arthur Smith and Russell Wilson going to a team is going to be an upgrade. Right. But I think that may be the case where they might be able to give a boost to what production can happen out there, especially for Pat Freiermuth. Deontay Johnson's gone, so there's some opportunity for targets that are out there. And you may not realize this because of how much hate it went out there for the usage of Kyle Pitts in Atlanta, but the Falcons were actually the number one ranked target rate for tight ends in the NFL. They targeted tight ends at 34.3% of their passes, which is huge. But they just had competition for that tight end position where I feel like Pat Freiermuth doesn't really have that out in I almost said Seattle because Russell Wilson, but out in Pittsburgh. Dark horse for me to really make his way into the top 10 or one of the top tight ends we're talking about later on this year, and then possibly with his chemistry raising, and whether it's Russell Wilson back there or even if it ends up being Justin Fields, I think he has a chance to do well. He's already shown us flashes of being a 100-target potential type player. He got 98 targets in year 2. His rookie year, he had 7 scores. So I think he's got a shot to do really well, and we'll see what he does.
Yeah, I hate Arthur Smith. I've always really liked. Could you tell as a Pitts owner over the last couple of years? But Pat Freiermuth is someone that I really have always liked, and I've always found myself picking up either mid-season or at some point throughout the last couple of years. I've seen myself kind of picking him up. When you say Freiermuth is your guy, I think it's important also to say because this guy is going to be way better than where he's drafted, and then there's careful, this is a sleeping giant. So where are you really looking at him? And you don't have to give an official ranking, but just what type of pickup would this be for you if you're going after Freiermuth?
So for me, he's someone that I'd be comfortable targeting as my tight end in, like, say, redraft leagues this year. As I'm going into it, I think you'd be able to get him in some of the later rounds, and I'm good with him being my tight end if I'm not going to be able to grab Laporta, McBride, Andrews, Kincaid. I won't say Pitts' name because I know that's triggering for you. But he's someone that I would be comfortable targeting as my only tight end of my team, right? So in any of our redraft leagues, and I may or may not, depending on who's listening, be targeting him in trades for someone that I can have as a stand-in, because I'm holding on to a Hawkinson right now in our Dynasty League, who's obviously going to miss at least a good chunk of the season this year. So he's someone that I'd be comfortable having now, and if Hawkinson takes a while, I would be okay with him being my guy even throughout this entire year, and see if he pays off as someone that I can hold on to for a couple of years.
Yeah. I think the one important call out is that Deontay Johnson, with leaving the Steelers, there is a opening for like who's going to take those targets, and there's a lot of unknowns there. And I think that if you're grabbing him for a number 2 or a filler for a couple of years, I think that's also okay. It is, I think, in years past where it was like 1 or 2 top player tight ends, he was more interesting to me. But I think that there's so many exciting tight ends that are out there that are giving a decent production that I think that it's almost a fatigue of that level of tight end, though it's still valuable, but it's more of a mindset of like remembering that even this type of tight end can be valuable and he has upside. I mean, as a he almost hit 1,000. He was like 700 something yards as a rookie and 7 touchdowns, which as a rookie tight end is huge. And it's year 3 is usually where tight ends can, if they're going to break out, that's usually like the odds favorite of like the 4th year of when they really start showing and growing. So I think going into his 4th year, then I think that's an excellent your guy.
Appreciate it. Well, I think now that we've stated who our guys are, we're going to talk about that. Your favorite position in all of fantasy football to hold on to guys forever, and that's the running back position.
Yeah, sarcasm in that, but I do love having a great running back, and I think it's necessary. The problem with, and why I guess we don't talk about running backs as much here, is we just have this personal philosophy of just focusing a lot more on wide receiver, and then kind of rotating through and filling in running backs as you need them, and moving off of them quicker because of the shorter lifespan of like their career. So I think that I look at most running backs as rentals for 2 to 3 years, and if you have somebody like Bijan or Gibbs, like that's a blessing, and you can probably ride that for 5-6 years. But you always kind of have to look as they're entering their first contract negotiation of like, do I want to stick or do I want to cash out? But so it's exciting though to still like to talk about it for our top 10 going into Dynasty, because we talk about so many other things usually, and I'm interested to see kind of where we differ and what your thought process is as we go into Dynasty. It's so interesting because this is probably the position that changes the most between redraft and Dynasty themselves. As a heads up, we're looking at this as like a Dynasty ranking, and I think that it changes a lot between them, but I also will value some players higher if I'm, like, for example, I don't have him as a spoiler. I don't have Henry as in my top 10, but that's somebody that I thought about putting in there because even if I got 1 year and it's an explosive year for me, I think sometimes that's just worth it. So tell us throughout either our guys or throughout our top. We're going to do our 10 through 6 right now, and then our next episode we'll do the rest of them 5 through 1, and tell us where your opinions differ. If you call us out on what you think, and let us know, and we can have that discussion in the chat. But what's your general philosophy with running backs within Dynasty football before we jump into our number 10?
Yeah, so when I'm looking at running back, I know I've talked in a ton over the last few weeks or the last few episodes about that 3-year cycle. When I'm looking at a position or looking at a player, how are they going to do for me in the last 3 weeks? I think, or the next 3 years. I think for me, the running back is that one anomaly position. You talked about like getting off them faster and moving off them at a quicker pace, just based on the longevity they have at the position. And so when you look at these guys, it's got to be a balance of is this a player that is going to be my pop player, someone that I'm going to look at that year, like you talked about with Henry, and you talked about some of these other guys, Saquon Barkley jumping over to Philadelphia, who I do have in my top 10 with what is improved here. I wouldn't be mad if someone included, and this might be like further off the list, but if someone talked about Joe Mixon as someone that's going to pop this year, but it might be this year, but we haven't seen Joe Mixon run behind a decent offensive line that like the one that Houston has ever, I feel like, in his career, at least for a long time. So he might be the surprising dark horse to pop into the top 10. He's not in my top 10, but he's someone that could be there. Right. So you have to look at the pop potential at running backs in a way that you don't maybe for other positions, because there's still too many mouths to feed in with wide receivers. There's too many variables there, but with I think you can read a little bit more into someone's numbers popping a little bit easier in the running back position than you can any other one. So it weighs heavier in how you rank them. So that's how I take a look at it. But I think what we can do, I mean, unless you want to jump into yours, you shared a little bit about how you break them down, but we can jump right into our top 10.
Yeah, I'm happy to. I think one of the things I'll just I'll throw out, the only other thing I would add is I really look at for Dynasty, I look at I know it sounds like a narrative, but the age cliff is real with running backs. And I think that, so contract and where you are in your contract, I think matters almost the most. But the age cliff of 27 that's like where it usually drops out, outside of some of the anomalies that we have and just the outliers, like a McCaffrey, Henry, like those kind of players. 27 is just it's a dramatic percentage of people drop off pretty huge at that point. So that's something that there's one player in particular that we'll get to very soon that is not on mine at top 10 at all, and it's on yours, and that's part of the reason. So that's just something that I keep in mind when I'm looking at running backs in Dynasty. Looking at our our number 10s, we'll just say them kind of at the same time, not us both saying it and jinxing each other, but our top 10, I have Jonathan Brooks, and you have Kyren Williams as your number 10. So I'll talk about mine first, and then we can go to Kyren Williams and up. For this one is somebody who, Jonathan Brooks, who you do not have on your top 10. For me, I threw him in here because I feel that this is definitely going to be where he's at next year in people's views. And since he's already playing, then I consider it a must to have him in my top 10. I think it'll start off slow, and I'm hoping it does. And then I'm hoping I can possibly acquire this player. It's somebody I definitely was thinking about early in the first round of grabbing, but I felt like it was too much of a reach. He was drafted as the first running back, and I think that draft capital really does matter. If you're drafted as a first running back, no matter how strong or weak a class is, that's a huge sign, especially if you're a day 2 running back. So I think that was really big. He had in 2023, he had 1,300 yards and 10 touchdowns at Texas, and he is going into with a pretty severe injury that was late in the season that he wasn't able to finish all that with. He's recovering from that, and he's still chosen as a top number 1 running back within the draft on day 2. Teams make bad picks in NFL. They get it wrong sometimes, but in general, they have more money and resources than any fantasy analyst to say if a player is good or not. And they have a young quarterback that can throw off some dump offs. He doesn't have a lot of competition right off the bat, and they need other areas on their team to fix in the future. So I don't see them doubling up with a running back next year, bringing somebody else in. I feel like they feel this is locked in and they can move forward with it. So that's the main reason I have Jonathan Brooks in my top 10, and I think he's a buy right now at most prices.
Yeah, I mean, I'm still struggling with your hatred for Chuba Hubbard. I mean, I know I've talked about that before, but just your distaste for Chuba Hubbard and Miles Sanders, and Rashad Penny. I mean, come on. I mean, Rashad Penny's there now.
Come on,
dude to be so. I don't know. I totally get where you're coming from. I like the idea of putting in a rookie into the top 10 just as a sleeper pick to have in here. I feel like Carolina has done a ton outside of Chicago to set up their team for success. Put a lot of pieces together this offseason to really support their offense and help their young quarterbacks. And Jonathan Brooks is one of those pieces. So I think he's got the potential there to break into the top 10. I don't know if I'm looking at all of my running backs, if I would put him, I have him closer to 14, 15 on my ranking, but I can see why you would put him in there. For me, for Kyren Williams, you can't deny the work that he's done already. So I felt like I could have pushed him out of my top 10, but I feel like he had to be in there, despite what they've done in the offseason. I think he's going to lose a lot of work to Blake Corum, at least to goal line work. I think he's going to lose some stuff there. But he's got high upside there. He closed out the season last year in the final 6 games, averaging 133 yards, over a touchdown per game. So I think he can pick up where he left off there. Maybe Blake Corum being there will help give him more rest and be stronger throughout the game. So I think there's a shot there for him too. So I think Kyren Williams deserves to be in the top 10 just based off the work given. He's still got high upside. I could fall on my face with this one and keep having him in there if Blake Corum takes all the goal line work or takes all the third down work. But we'll see what happens. But I think Kyren definitely has a shot to stay a top 10 running back this year for sure.
So is part of the reason, because you mentioned I could have had him outside of the top 10, because I have him a little bit higher as a comparison, and we'll skip over when we get there. But I have him at 7 myself as a spoiler. So at 10, and thinking that you could drop him a little lower, let's kind of use that as a segue to your next player of Kenneth Walker, who has a really talented running back with him. is Corum the reason why Kyren may have dropped past your 10? And what's the difference between that situation and Kenneth Walker as your number 9 that you have with a very similar situation there?
Yeah, so we kind of saw it last year with Kenneth and Charbonnet. With Kenneth, like I know him, like he's my buddy.
Kenny.
With Walker and Charbonnet last year, right? Yeah, my boy Kenny. We kind of saw what that was going to look like and how that split was going to work. And I think that 60-40 at most will still be, at least for this season, will be there. But we saw Kenneth's talent a lot stronger last year. And the Seahawks will really focus in on that run game. I think I'm leaving it more to the unknowns, as we don't know what Blake's going to be. Whereas I believe in Kenneth still holding on to that one spot. Kenneth Walker holding on to that one spot. He had 9 touchdowns last year. He rushed for over 1,000 yards. I don't think that's going away coming into this year either. So I think he holds on to that top 10 right there. Whereas with Kyren, we don't know what that role is going to look like and how it's going to shake out in that Rams locker room.
Yeah, so one of the things that surprised me, and this is another piece that I look at for running backs, I think anybody does, we're in a full point PPR, which we're considering making adjustments. But for Kenneth Walker as well as Kyren Williams, I think one of the big pieces here that is a concern is their receptions. Like how much work are they getting in that game? And both Walker and Kyren played a decent amount of the season. I think had both of them have some injury concerns here and there, but we've got like a decent sample size, and they throw under like 30. They throw around 30 or receive around 30 catches a year. And when we're looking at like what does it take to get to a top 3 in the last 10 years, 4 players have ever been a top 3 running back that scored or that had under 40 receptions in that year. So when you're under 40, it's very unlikely that you got that top echelon. And it was insane. I think what was the stat? 27% for Kyren Williams and of his touchdowns. So it's not receptions that's getting him up there. So you have these outliers. Right. You have Adrian Peterson in 2015, Doug Martin in the same year, ironically 2015, he had around 30 receptions. Elliott in 2016, and Henry is just that outlier. So you really have these outlier players that if they don't catch, which is kind of my concern with Walker, is he doesn't catch that many balls and he has the competition. So I'm a little bit worried about his future. And for me, he's actually not he's not currently in my top 10. But I think that's why I look at that competition mixed with the receptions, and it gives me at least a little bit of a pause.
Yeah, I see that. Yeah, and there's a couple of guys on my list that obviously are going to have at a higher reception rate that I kept out of my top 10 that I'm like questioning myself and kind of shooting myself in the foot about. But I think their workloads are going to go way down. I think about people like Rashad White, who almost broke into my top 10. Put him above Jonathan Brooks, for example, as someone who had an insane workload last year, who I think he's probably going to project. I think when I looked at projections for this year, he was projecting over 50 receptions. So it's just one of those guys that I would include in that list when you break it down that way. But yeah, I still like Kenneth Walker, and maybe it's because I drafted him in our startup league last year, and I just have a heartstring for him, even though I traded him away eventually. But for sure. Who's your number 9?
Yeah.
What you got?
So my number 9 comes with the same lesson that another lesson that I have with running backs is one of the last people we talked about, Kyren Williams, kind of has the same concern. Late owned running backs, no matter how, like, think about an undrafted free agent of I'm now forgetting his name. That's how much it matters when you're drafted late. What was the Jaguars name?
James Robinson.
James Robinson. Okay. See, this is the painful part. You can be so amazing. He was so amazing. He carried such a workload, but the teams are willing to move away from an investment that is low really fast and go to Etienne, right? And that player it was an amazing player that did so well for a team and then disappears and no one even wants them. So I think running backs, it's so more than any other position, since it's such a short career and such a little spurt, like the investment they will move on from. And this player is my number 9, Pacheco. That's my biggest concern. He was round 7, so he was almost an undrafted free agent, the Chiefs pick of round 7. So that is really an almost undrafted free agent we're looking at. And that's scary, and that's his downside. But his upside is that he doesn't have a lot of competition behind him. You have like Clyde Edwards-Helaire that is competing with a rugby player that was really probably just for special teams, and then you've got a couple other players there that were rookies this year that are just late round flyers. So I don't think he has a lot of competition. There are concerns with a lot of players in the Chiefs right now. They have a trifecta. They're going for the three-peat of felonies with some of their players, and they're having trouble right now. And he's one of the consistent good players. So I think that he deserves to be on there, because sometimes you just gotta blot out some of the noise and have your answer be good player, good offense, not a lot of competition. Simply put, let's get him on the top 10. So I think it's just a safe pick that I'm not scared of putting at number 9.
Yeah, that's fair. That's not the three-peat the Chiefs want to be talking about, right? Just made me laugh when you said that. They've got another three-peat online to be worried about that three-peat for sure. I don't think you can go wrong there. CEH has already shown up as as a bust, really. So Pacheco just doesn't have the competition, like you said. You just never know what you're going to get with running backs out of the Chiefs offense, especially with Mahomes there. But I mean, Andy Reid though has been able to showcase like fantasy-worthy running backs in his coaching career. So it's really interesting to see how they've been utilized over the last few years. And maybe Pacheco's that guy. It'll be him as we go along. So jumping into number 8 here, I think
our first tie.
I know we agree on something for once in our lives. So Devon Achane, as you jump into this, I'm taking a look, smaller running back, someone that I put it in at number 8 because he's got such a key role in this offense. He's got a solid floor. They're going to utilize him. He's averaged 7 yards per carry last year. Now, I know that was probably weighted on a couple of really insane games that he had. But even with that in mind, I think that he's going to, we're a year older on Mostert. I think Jalen Wright was drafted as kind of a Mostert replacement. And I don't think it's going to hurt Achane too much. So it's just someone that I'm trusting and want to include in my top 10 because I think he's got quite a role out there. And with so many options in the passing game, when you got Tyreek, you've got Waddle out there, you got the reincarnation of Odell Beckham Jr. out there. They're not going to be stacking the box on these guys. You can't with how fast they move, and they're all speedsters out there. So Achane's going to be rocking and rolling in the same way that he was. The only reason I would put him higher on the list is because of how pass heavy this offense is.
Yeah. So I guess my counterpoint to that, and why I think that this is the first player on our list that I feel has a strong potential to end top 3.
Okay.
So he had 27 receptions last year, which is under the 40 that I was talking about, and definitely under the 30, obviously. But he had a slow start. I think he was maybe either injured in camp or he came in just lighter, but he didn't play week 1. He had only like 2 touches in week 2, and then he went on a tear and had his best game in week 3, and then he was injured for a bit. So 9 games really is our sample size for the most part. So half the season getting to 27, I think, is he catches them pretty consistently. He's being targeted pretty consistently, and all the reports out of camp are it's made me so happy to hear that they're really looking to utilize him similar to Gibbs, where he's practicing and getting out into wide receiver formations and taking passes from not just behind the line, but out wide as well. So they're looking to utilize him as a hybrid between a wide receiver and a running back, which lightens a lot of the concerns. If you have Mostert there, I think Jalen Wright is more of the replacement for Mostert, and we've talked about that before. Yeah. And Achane is just such a unique player, as is Gibbs, where Gibbs has Montgomery, and I'm not scared. Achane has Mostert and Wright, and I'm not scared, because they can all be successful when you have a running back like him that is smaller, but they use knowing that he's smaller and he's an explosive player. There's not many running backs that I have that I would go up against that on the other side on a Monday night game, and I'm down or I'm up 30 points and my opponent has Achane. There's not many running backs where I'd be like, this is a real possibility that I lose this game.
Yeah.
And so when you have an explosive game, a week winning running back like that, if you string a few of those together and you manage to stay healthy, which is a big if and the biggest concern, then you have a potential top 3 running back on your hands. So this is the first one that I'm glad we have them at the same spot, but I think the first one that I would say could be a top 3.
Yeah, when you brought it up with how many games he actually played, he still managed, even though we're looking at that many less games, I think he participated in 11 total, he still managed almost 1,000 all-purpose yards last year. He had 800.
Yeah.
Like it's like what? So
yeah.
Just to think about it that way, like that's yeah. I don't even know. Maybe we don't have him high enough. We'll find out as time goes on. But
I don't think we do. But I think we have valid concerns that put him where he's at, because in Dynasty also it's about the long-term appeal of a player. So if it changes and he truly is more of a pass catcher hybrid, and it protects him from the bruising that it takes to be, for a small guy like him at 5'9", 188 to be a true running back. And if you make him more of a hybrid and change that load, you now open up the doors to a longer career in general, like a McCaffrey, who is a pass catcher. He's also a bruiser, but you have those running backs that can last a little longer. Gibbs is like a perfect candidate to be a successful fantasy player for years, far longer than the average running back, because he's a pass catcher. So if we see that change this year and it's validated, then I wouldn't be surprised to see him go up to a top 3 moving forward. So just to recap really quick, since we've kind of jumped all over and we've talked about a couple other players and put them in. At number 10, I had Jonathan Brooks, you had Kyren Williams. At number 9, I had Isiah Pacheco, and you had Kenneth Walker. At number 8, we both had Achane. And at number 7 that's where I ended up putting Kyren Williams myself. I think he's strong enough to keep the position, but I think this is probably the one of all the players that are on my list that I was most nervous about putting on here. It was Pacheco and him. Because I could see running. This is like the fell off the map situation. Like, it's a possibility that happens with Kyren. He doesn't have a lot of investment into him, and no matter how good you are, you really could fall off the map and just be moved on from especially by McVay. He just continually shows that. So I would say that if he balls out this year, I'm feeling really good, even with Corum there. But I think if it seems curious, the split at all, I have him and I would move on from him as fast as I can, knowing that that's just the name of the game with running backs. But a new player on the list who I have one spot higher. So we're talking about at the same time, Etienne, you have him as your number 7.
Yeah, so Travis Etienne, for me, and someone who's an Etienne owner, someone that I've believed in, and just a super consistent player. He's versatile. He's catching passes. I think he had 50. Let me see here. He had 58 receptions last year. Targeted 73 times in that offense. All-purpose yards were almost 1,500 yards last year. So someone that you can really trust in. He 11 touchdowns. Rushing, he had one receiving touchdown, so just double-digit touchdowns for me too. Over 5 yards per carry in 2023. So I just love how they use him in the offense. I was worried last year when they drafted Tank Bigsby, but I'm not super concerned about that just based on what he did last year. Someone that I'm going to hold on to. If I played the Arlen philosophy, this might be the year I might look at trying to cash him out. Because he's going towards it, going into year 3, and I think could be peaking this year, or potentially. And I know you like to trade your running backs as they're peaking, to get some pieces. So this is where I would look to do that if I was in that game. I have a tendency to hold on 1 year too long.
Sure.
But that's, for me, I'm like this year, as much as I'm an AFC West Chargers guy, I'm trying to emulate the Chiefs and go through for my three-peat. So I'm going to hold on to Etienne as I'm rocking my championships for one more year, and try to hold on to that position. But yeah, I think Etienne is going to just come back. He was the number 3 running back in the league last year, and I think that I don't think he's going to be there again this year, but I think he's still going to be a top 10 running back for sure.
Yeah, and I think his fantasy points per game are actually put him at the 7th among running backs over I think last year. So yeah, I think we have him in the perfect spot. You have him at 7. I have him at 6. I do think that. I think that there's concerns for him too with pass catching. He's one of the people that showed up that's under 40, so calling that out. But at first, I was afraid earlier in his career with James Robinson there, and then we had Tank Bixby come in, and it turns out that James Robinson was nothing, and Tank is pretty not good at football comparatively, and he's not a concern, I don't think. But I think you brought it up, and this is exactly where. I wouldn't trade him right now. I would trade him after this season. The season ends. He has a great year. And personally, just where I'm at, that's where I would trade him. I think that's when you can get a haul still, because we're going in after the 4th year, and then you don't have to hear if they pick up the 5th at that point. You just trade him away right at the end of the season. If you're not a contender, you can cash out. There's no reason to have him if you're not a contender, because by the time you are, most likely he's not gonna be great. And I I don't have any draft picks ever again, so this is how you get them back, is you trade the running backs that look like surefire stars. So yeah, I think this is where I move on from him. So another player that this one I'm a little ashamed moving to so Etienne is my number 6, and the last player that we'll talk about today is your number 6 ranked player, who this player I'm like, I think this is the biggest one that I'm kind of almost taking a risk on not having him on, but I just couldn't fit him into the top 10, and I don't know if I'm wrong or not. So I think this is where I would ask that the people watching give their take. If you're going to say anything or any comment, I want to hear what people's opinions are on Barkley, Saquon Barkley, as Nate says. That's who I really want to hear people's opinion on, because I feel like I'm wrong, but I can't help but not put him in my top 10, and you have him as your number 6. Tell me why. Tell me why I'm wrong.
He has been nothing but a heartbreak for a long while, so that kind of makes sense. But jumping in, he's going on. First off, thank goodness he's on a good team, right? Like, he's not having to make up for the problems that the Giants were a hot mess. Other than Daniel Jones being a phenomenal quarterback, he's had to deal with all kinds of problems. Just kidding, that was a joke for everybody. But I will say, most improved player award going to Daniel Jones this year. We'll see what happens. But
you did almost put him as your veteran, my guy.
Sure, yes. In our pre-show conversation, I did talk about Daniel Jones as a potential my guy.
We weren't recording it, so I had to make sure I said that here. But go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead with Barkley.
For sure. Saquon here. I think he's just putting him in the position that he's in right now, and how versatile of a running back that he is. He had 1,300 rushing yards last year, 10 TDs in 2023, and that's playing for the Giants. Right? Now, Jalen is for sure going to take some of that away. But the reality is, Jason Kelce had a ton to do with how successful the tush push was, right? And as more and more teams are doing the tush push, and more defenses figuring out how to stop it as time's going to continue to go through, I think just the traditional Saquon Barkley being an option back there, someone that can really smash it in, or be an outlet for him either way. He's given Jalen so many options around the goal line. I think this is just going to be huge for him. I think he's going to have kind of not that he ever went away. We're going to see Saquon producing in a way that we haven't before, because he hasn't had the options that he had playing for the Giants in the past. And is he going to have a chip on his shoulder playing in the same division? One, to hammer it home 2 times a year against the Giants, I think is really going to help boost him as well. So I'm going to stop doing it. Saquon is going to have a great year this year, and I don't think you can't. Even if we're talking dynasty, there's no way you can have him outside of your top 10, like some people might have on this conversation. But
I know. Yeah, so that
and I do
other person
before you jump
most
into
likely
how you
is
feel
me.
dumb about that, or whether or not our commenters are going to feel that way as well. I will say also correction on Etienne. He was top 3 in total fantasy points last year. But you're right. Probably the truer way to measure is per game basis, and on a per game basis, he was number 7.
Yeah, I don't know, and I think this one I'm going to be 100% honest. It just, for me, this is more of a feeling than anything. I think there's a minimum. The thing I can point at is there's a minimum investment. It's not much more than a franchise tag that he ended up getting with a rushing quarterback and plenty of talent on the roster for them to throw to. And so how much will they use him on the... I think Jason Kelce can teach the new center, who was also their guard already and knew what he was doing, how to do it. I don't know if anybody can do it like Jason can, or if it's truly a secret that they have, that they were able to figure out, that they can teach others. So that there's two things that I'm more excited than anything to look at this year in football. It's the kickoff, which every year it's like, oh my God, it's the kickoff to start the whole season. And now it's not going to be a dead ball play. So that's one.
Right.
And number 2 is the tush push going to work? And if it does, I think that's a valid concern people should have on Hurts. Take that away from Barkley. I think Barkley is good enough to be very successful. I don't know if he's going to keep it up for 3 years. I don't know. He's right, kind of like, I think isn't he also like, I feel like he's also 27, is he not?
He is 27, yeah. He's at the cusp.
Yeah, and I think he might... I'm actually going to look this up, because, like, what if he's 28 tomorrow? But that's a really big... That's a really big piece to it, is like, I see this cliff. I think he's good enough to kind of... no, he's not. He won't be 28 until after this season. But I don't see 3 years of dominance left personally. He has an injury history. I see an Ezekiel Elliott ending to his story. And I think that's where I said, like, there's some things I can point to. I fully admit that I might be fully wrong. And I fully admit that I might be basing some of this on feeling alone. So I think I'm okay with being wrong on this one. For me personally, those are the reasons why that is the reason I'm out. I'm doing a Shark Tank ending on that one. But yeah, I might be crazy. But the part going to, like, this extra thing of going to the Eagles within division, I didn't know why there was so much hate on him for doing it. I get it. But for me, I'm like, it's a player. He's going to leave him alone. But then I did just look up his age to get his birthday, and he was born in the Bronx. So he was born a Giants fan. Maybe that's gross then. Maybe I agree with everybody.
Yeah, and he's going to be playing against that hate. So we'll see what that does to him mentally. But I will call out, though, like, what they did with DeAndre Swift last year too. Like, there was a lot of talk about DeAndre coming over to the Eagles last year when he was more of like a pass catching back, and then they used him as a true rusher and kind of an every down, because before DeAndre Swift last year, the Eagles had previously been like kind of a committee running back team. But I think they showed last year that they can feature someone, and then you're going to get someone. You're going to take DeAndre Swift to do that. What are they going to do with someone like Saquon Barkley? So I'm excited about it. And now I don't even know when I'm saying it wrong.
Saquon and Saquon, yeah.
But I fully believe in what he's able to do, and that's why I have, even though he's at that age cliff, I have him so high on my rankings. I have him at number 6. So I'm looking forward to it.
All right. Well, I think that closes us out for today. And then next week, we will be looking at number 5 through 1. And as a sneak peek, we have the next 3 spots we actually agree on. So look at that. And then we'll also look at our My Guy for our rookie My Guys. We'll each pick one player that we are really looking forward to seeing their career, seeing the pop and why that this, in a dynasty perspective, is who we're choosing as our guy. But it's been real. Make sure you do all the YouTube's things, like, subscribe, all that. What's up?
I forgot something that I want to include in this episode, and I just really want to make sure we talk about this because you did something in our league this past week.
Yeah, well, that's, you know what? I did something. I did a horrible trade, and it matches my guy for the next one. So
yeah, you're
tune
right.
in next week, and you can find out my horrible selling everything that I have just to get a mediocre possibility next week. Thanks for that.
All right, we'll call that as a teaser, just to remind everyone that this is going to happen. There's some crazy stuff, and we'll show up pictures and faces and whatnot.
Oh, great. Cool. All right, y'all. Take care.